This is always an interesting video. I feel like I do it every year, and it's always important, I think, to note and to understand why, certain quarterbacks feel so inconsistent one week to another. This is why. This is usually the reason. And once I do this every year, I feel like I get the league a lot more. So I probably should do it earlier every year. But regardless, doing it now here, I think it could be an interesting video. So what is the list? What are we talking about here? It's pretty simple. It's quarterbacks and how they perform when they're blitzed versus when they're not blitzed and what the difference is. So this is the chart. Instead of spending forever explaining it, let's just show it. So it's going to be passer rating is the stat we're using, and let's use Ryan Tannehill, the player at the top of the list, as our example. When he is blitzed, his passer rating was 93.3 this season. When he's not blitzed, it's 64.7 this season. So it's a differential of, I'm doing plus and minus just because it's a way to make the list make sense. Having a plus or a minus next to it doesn't actually make one better or worse. It's just a way to differentiate it. So Tannehill's difference when he is blitzed is 29.6 points higher than when he is not blitzed. And you might be wondering, wait, you're using Tannehill on this list? Yes, every quarterback who has had at least 20% of their team snaps, that's 39 eligible quarterbacks, they make the list. So, him and Cousins being the top two on the list aren't really that helpful for us, right? There's maybe a bit more intrigue with Cousins that I'll get to a little bit later on. I do wonder if Justin Jefferson being there means you basically can't blitz them. There's also that big, touchdown pass to Jordan Addison that might just be bumping up those numbers a little bit. But still, it's interesting. Tua, though, is the first real fascinating one for me on this list at number 3 listen, his passer rating is still nearly 100 when he's not blitzed. Like, it's really good. But when you blitz him, you basically lose, and you have to think a big part of this is the Tyreek Hill factor, right? And I specifically chose more of a team stat in passer rating than like a more individual stat like PFF grade, because I'm more fascinated in the team success than the actual player itself. It's very possible Tua is playing equally as well. It's just that the offense works better when he is blitzed. But to me, this is kind of a clear example of like, hey, if you're an NFL team, this is pretty clear. Don't blitz him. Yes, Tua will kind of pick you apart if you don't let him, if you don't blitz him, but Tyreek Hill will very much pick you apart if you do blitz him. So you kind of got to, pick your poison, and the poison to pick clearly is not blitzing. Baker Mayfield's a really fascinating one. In fact, these next few are very fascinating because, okay, listen, Tua's great either way. Baker, 87.5 when he's not blitzed. That's not quite as good. When he is blitzed, though, I think a big part of this, too, again, talk about receivers, having Mike Evans with one-on-one matchups, if you blitz him, that's an issue. And I think Mayfield just played well when he's been blitzed this season. Mahomes is another really fascinating one. I mean, you see, again, differential of 15, which is notable because, he's someone who it's kind of been known for forever. You can't blitz Mahomes. He finds ways to make it work. Some people might have thought, well, maybe that's the Tyreek Hill factor for a while, but no, it still is a factor. But when you don't blitz him, his passer rating drops below 90, which makes sense to me. They've had trouble getting guys open down the field. So if you just drop back and play coverage, it's hard for them to get open, and eventually the pass rush will come and will make the play happen. So fascinating there. For Herbert, his numbers are better than Mahomes in both when blitzed and when not blitzed here, but there still is a similar sized jump right here, which again kind of does make a little bit of sense to me as, Herbert is someone who, if he can get those one-on-one matchups down the field, does have a history of hitting them. CJ Stroud, another really fascinating one, because traditionally young quarterbacks do not have big jumps like this. In fact, a lot of times it's the other way around, and we'll see that once we get to the bottom of the list. You do often see young quarterbacks have the opposite thing happen, where they really struggle when they're blitzed, but play well when they're not blitzed. But Stroud kind of being very different than your average young quarterback here, which he's been very different in many ways this season. Desmond Ridder also that situation, which is odd because I feel like Atlanta is so much about system and structure. And so the fact that he's at his best when it's a little bit off structure is maybe a bit damning for Arthur Smith, quite frankly. Kenny Pickett, this totally checks out. He's much better when he's on the move, making things happen. You can blame Matt Canada for that one, certainly, if you want to, but that totally checks out to me. And Jordan Love, another young quarterback who plays better when he's blitzed, interestingly enough, which again, kind of checks out. Like with Kenny Pickett, when things are kind of moving around, he feels like he's better there. Going over to some more, we'll get to the kind of the middle players, and we'll, breeze through some of these. I'm not going to go through each one of these just because not all of them are that fascinating, but kind of the notable ones. Josh Allen, another guy who he is better when he is blitzed than when he is not blitzed, which again does check out, right? That's kind of what you would expect here, so nothing too surprising there. Also a typo, which is always fun on 13. Derek Carr should be minus 6.5. Just realized that right now, so that's bad job by me. So he's someone who's better when he's not blitzed, which again does kind of check out. Pressure can rattle him a little bit. But, someone like Brock Purdy, who you might think he's only good in structure, well, if you blitz him, now you have to deal with, George Kittle being one-on-one down the field, or, Brandon Ayuk being one-on-one down the field. We've seen in back-to-back weeks how poorly that can go. But yeah, for the rest of the guys on this list, Aiden O'Connell, okay, a little bit better when he's blitzed. Not really sure what to make of that. Pretty much everyone else, though, it's like, okay, nothing really notable here. No big major takeaways. And going over to the next chart, you're going to see the numbers change a little bit because now I'm going to go to the difference in terms of the numbers on the last chart were where you ranked in terms of being better when blitzed versus when not blitzed. Now it's where you ranked in terms of being better when not blitzed versus when blitzed. We're seeing, with the exception of Burrow, now the quarterbacks who are better when they are not blitzed, when they're just hanging out, right? When guys aren't coming after them. Again, some guys who are pretty much the same at both. Prescott, there's been basically no difference with Dallas if you blitz or don't blitz. At the bottom of the list, though, Justin Fields is currently at 13. He's someone who, in years past, has been a disaster when he's been blitzed, which, again, I know might seem counterintuitive because he runs so well, but usually he kind of tries to do too much in those situations. Definitely has gotten better at that. Is not quite a disaster there. 88.8 is still lower than when he's not blitzed, but not in a massive way. Daniel Jones and Jimmy Garoppolo both have had their struggles when blitzed this year. Not really sure what to make of that. Just find it interesting. As for the top 10, this is why I made a note of the Kirk Cousins thing, because Josh Dobbs is actually on the other end of the spectrum. And there's always the question of how much of it is a quarterback and how much of it is receivers and stuff like that. It does tend to be more quarterback driven than receiver driven, just noting that. So perhaps Dobbs is a little bit better when he's not blitzed, and when he's blitzed, his numbers get worse. But when Jefferson gets back, perhaps that could change, and he could be a little bit more complete of a player and get a little better. Who knows? Again, the 88.5 passer rating when he is not blitzed is still lower than Kirk Cousins, despite Kirk Cousins being number 2 on the list in terms of being better when blitzed versus not blitzed. But still, just interesting to note there. Jalen Hurts is a quarterback who, I said oftentimes this can be a little bit predictive in terms of it tends to be more about the quarterback than about the other stuff, but Hurts is maybe an exception, as in years past he was amazing when blitzed. This year, though, actually better when he isn't blitzed, which is interesting enough because his play style you think would be better for someone who is blitzed, and that's been the case in the past. Not this year, though. Lamar, an interesting player as well. He is someone who kind of the whole thing has always been, you got to blitz Lamar. And I've always speculated that I think a big part of it is kind of less about the Lamar Jackson himself and more about you're getting the ball out of his hands. And in this scenario, it still is the jump, but actually, an 89.2 passer rating when blitzed isn't bad. You'll take that. It's just been a lot better when he isn't blitzed. So still, the strategy is the same. Blitz Lamar Jackson. Guys like Gardner Minshew, Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford, kind of interesting here. Again, guys who are definitely significantly better when they aren't blitzed. So I think, especially I've seen it with, Goff might be the main guy to talk about as the Lions are trying to be a contender here. Does feel like when teams blitz the Lions, the offense is so about fooling opposing defenses. I think sometimes people get a little bit complacent and they say, okay, well, we've got to make sure we don't get fooled. Got to remember, you got to try to fool them too. And when you do that, Goff's numbers become pedestrian, but they're great when he's not blitzed. Interesting if teams start to pick up on that. Will Levis, this makes sense, right, that he would have a big disparity. He's been really bad when blitzed this year in terms of passer rating, but actually great when he's not blitzed. So perhaps there's some room to grow there. Young players do tend to struggle at this right away. Trevor Lawrence at number 3 is really surprising to me, quite frankly. When he's blitzed, this offense just hasn't worked. When he's not blitzed, it's worked really well, actually. So this is huge, and I think that, again, a big part of it has to be similar to the Lamar Jackson thing. Receivers just haven't gotten open for Trevor Lawrence, and when he kind of has to just get rid of the ball quickly and rely on his receivers, you're now getting the ball out of one of your best players' hands and, sometimes into a good player's hands like Calvin Ridley or Christian Kirk, but they just haven't been as consistent this year. Your receiving core has not graded well consistently this season, and that's probably been a big part of why you see this big jump. Another big jump in terms of this with Russell Wilson at number 2, which is fascinating, the 26-point jump when he is not blitzed. I'm imagining it's kind of similar thing. I like Jerry Jeudy, I like Cortland Sutton, but they're not exactly superstars, not guys you just throw up to one-on-one and hope it works out type of guys, in my opinion, and the numbers kind of show that. And then number 1, Tommy DeVito, incredible stuff. Actually has a passer rating over 100 when he isn't blitzed, but his passer rating when he's blitzed is 49.7. I don't know if I've ever seen a disparity that significant, so that's pretty interesting. So yeah, plenty of takeaways. To reiterate, kind of the major ones, I think that if you're a team watching this video, you say, okay, if you're playing the Lions, if you're playing the Jaguars, if you're playing the Broncos, those contending teams, you gotta blitz. Some guy, also the Eagles and Vikings and Ravens, I would say still probably makes sense to blitz. And then there's some teams that you just like, hey, don't blitz these guys. The Dolphins, don't blitz them. The Buccaneers, the Chiefs, the Chargers, the Texans, those are teams you don't blitz. That's kind of how I view all of this stuff. And then, everyone else, you kind of just, go play by play, really. But yeah, interesting stuff. That's what I think. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.